16. The Lord is come. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 9. For ye know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that, though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that ye, through his poverty, might be made rich. One of the more shocking experiences of seminary life is the arrogance of scholars. Truth does not exist without their confirmation. I imagine that if seminary scholars told the truth, they would say that it was too bad that the revelation of God was given back in Bible times, and not nowadays, when there would be people like themselves able better to interpret and explain it. Thus, the incarnation and the virgin birth of our Lord were, some scholars have held, unknown to the early church, except to Matthew and Luke, because supposedly only Matthew and Luke wrote about it. But Luke chapter 1 verses 1 to 4 tells us that he is reporting on those things which are most surely believed among us, and to confirm, the certainty of those things wherein thou hast believed. Luke makes it clear that what he is reporting on and confirming, whether respecting the virgin birth or anything else, is familiar to all of them, and he has checked on the stories and confirmed them. This is all common knowledge in Christian circles. Their sources were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word. We have, thus, a summation of the great certainties of the faith. Luke reports on nothing new, but on the well-established foundations of the life of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. A modern scholar, J. Gresham Machen, has studied all the New Testament literature and found numerous other references to the virgin birth and to the incarnation. So, Matthew and Luke are not the only ones who wrote about it. Others refer to the fact of our Lord's birth and its miraculous character. Given this fact, when the virgin birth was common knowledge, why do we not hear more about it in the New Testament? The question assumes a modern context. We are not prone to believe in the, quote, supernatural, end quote, nor the miraculous. We want more, quote-unquote, evidence before we believe. In fact, to satisfy modern scholars, there should have been a document the length of the whole Bible just to prove the virgin birth and the resurrection. We're the products of 20th century scientism and unbelief, and therefore, supposedly, God should have addressed us rather than all generations of history. But the Bible speaks in the power of God to those whom he makes wise, not to the willful blindness of men who will not hear. God has made you wise and given you the grace to hear him, and he has withheld that grace from the ungodly. But does Paul speak of the incarnation, or does he pass over it? Several passages do clearly refer to the incarnation, but in very surprising terms. 2 Corinthians chapter 8 verse 9 is one of these verses. I think, perhaps, the most surprising one. Paul calls Christ's coming an act of grace. For ye know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that, though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that ye, through his poverty, might be rich. First, Paul tells us that the incarnation was an act of grace. Instead of a great and mighty act of grace, the glory of the incarnation was its grace. Now, there is no question, and the Bible certainly reflects it, that every reference to our Lord's coming and birth, Matthew and Mark and elsewhere, speaks of the majesty, the beauty, the glory of it. Heaven and earth coming together, angels coming to sing. The joy of the good news that the Lord is come. The virgin birth is, for us, a great and majestic event, but it was a condescension, an act of grace for God the Son. From our perspective, John's prologue, John chapter 1 verses 1 to 18, powerfully sets forth the glory of the incarnation. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But, from the vantage of heaven, it was an act of amazing grace. God the Son became God the babe of Bethlehem, assuming all of the burdens of a fallen human race. Second, he did this for our sakes. We became the recipients of his mercy, not because we deserved it, but in sheer and total grace. God gave us his only begotten Son. Matthew and Luke, from the perspective of history, from our viewpoint, call attention to its marvellous mercy and beauty. The centuries resound with the glory and majesty of that event. Many would call it the most joyful event of the ages. Paul enables us in this verse to see the virgin birth as a glorious act of grace. Third, the incarnation was an act of grace, Paul says, for your sakes. As a fallen humanity, we need God's sovereign grace to be saved. How great that salvation was and is, hymns have celebrated ever since. Joy to the world, the Lord is come, let earth receive her King. However rich the world may be in material resources, it is poor because of sin. The coming of the King is the coming of salvation. The Christmas carols are postmillennial. They celebrate a great victory because Christ's coming is the beginning of the reconquest of creation by the Creator King. I have asked people who object when I say that the carols are postmillennial. How else can you read Joy to the World, or any of the other hymns, or God rest ye merry gentlemen, and so on? Christ made himself poor by his incarnation in order to make us rich, that is, to make us heirs of his eternal kingdom. His birth was a step downward to bring us upward into his kingdom. Paul, as he tells us these things in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 9, begins with the words, "For ye know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ." We may be ignorant of all its implications, but we do know the grace of our Lord. It is very clear-cut in the meaning of this event. It is an act of grace. We know it in the joy of the Incarnation, a mighty act of grace and of condescension. And we know it in the new and eternal status that is ours in Jesus Christ. Then, fourth, Paul tells us that Christ's incarnation has made us rich. We are heirs of his eternal kingdom. This is often a hard word for us, but it was harder for him. We suffer here at times, but our destiny is an eternal one with him. Let earth receive her King. On the Indian reservation, there was an interesting man, an old Indian, taller than most, very quiet. He rarely spoke. He knew the faith, although he rarely, if ever, appeared at church. But the remarkable thing about him was that, while he kept his mouth shut, and not many people could say that they had heard him talk more than a time or two in the course of a year, when he opened his mouth, it was with considerable wit and wisdom. I recall once that he said how stupid people were to deny that Christianity was the best thing the world had ever seen. Why? Well, he was a man with a sense of humour. He said, "Take Thanksgiving and Christmas. They come at the worst part of the year, when there is snow all over, and you're shivering and cold, and you're wondering, how long will my wood pile last to heat my little one-room log cabin? And you are told to celebrate and eat." He said, "That is marvellous. When I heard about it, I thought the white man was pretty smart. My mistake was I thought I had to eat the turkey on that day, so I got a little bit sick before it was over." And he said, "Then Christmas, when you're beginning to feel blue, the days are short and dark because it is cloudy or snowing, and you have a time of giving of presents and everybody's happy, even if they don't know why." And so he said, "I don't see why people will speak against Christianity. I think it's wonderful." Well, I always appreciated the old man. It is a joyful time. Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King.